Hello and welcome to this exciting episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. I wonder if you're as excited as I am about tonight.
Yeah, it's great. This is a great privilege of our show that we get to meet our educational heroes. And Jim, welcome, Jim Knight. It's great to have you.
I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, so you're someone who sort of crept up on me in my professional life, mainly through my great friend Oliver Caviglioli, who talks about you all the time. And he basically introduced me to your work. And now my shelves, I have more books by Jim Knight on my shelf than by anybody else. So there you go. That's it, if that means anything. So, I asked this of Dylan William, actually, the same sort of question, but how do you feel about having this sort of status as a kind of grandee, kind of father figure in the world of education because of the kind of status that you have? Do you feel that?
100% no. I don't really feel anything. In fact, it all sounds a little foreign to put it that way. No, I'm very conscious of my limitations in areas where I'd like to grow, and I'm grateful for in large part, the people who shaped my thinking. I know everything I've done has really been a product of other people I've worked with. So it might be fun to feel. I guess there are times maybe at a conference where I kind of feel like people are, oh, you're Jim Knight, but no, I don't. And also my wife is quick to, humble me. She says things like, they only laugh at you because, they think they have to. You're not really that funny. So she keeps it from actually going anywhere. So
it's obviously, so it's important to be grounded. I know it's probably, embarrassing you to start with, but it's I think it's worth saying. I think it's in our world of teachers are generally humble people, I find. And I think it's pretty amazing to have created this body of work which has been so influential, and I think it's worth celebrating now. And one of the things we like to do is celebrate things which are current. And this has just come out: Instructional Coaching: 7 Factors for Success, which is the UK edition of the same book, essentially the
right.
US. And it's just
Yeah.
we all have our things. So. Now this is you invited me to write the foreword for this, so I had a sort of chance to read it, and it's just a fantastic encapsulation of this wonderful thing, instructional coaching. So, what's the kind of the sort of difference around this? So, but the previous book, I think the one you're most well known for is the Impact Cycle, and
right.
Jim Knight's Impact Cycle. So, what's the difference for people who don't know the difference? What's the difference between the Impact Cycle as a book and then taking it to these 7 factors of success? Book?
Yeah, I've got that humble title, The Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching, which I should just say, I use that kind of like a north point on a compass. I said, I really want to write one book that people can pick up and they get what instructional coaching is all about. And so there's 7 factors. One of them is a set of beliefs that drive. The first 3 are around who you are as a human being, who I am. And I think the first 3 chapters really apply to anybody who wants to be productive person. Not that they're the perfect things, but it was really exploring what's it mean to have a meaningful life, to have healthy relationships, to interact in ways that are mutually humanizing. And so first it's the beliefs, what I call the partnership approach, and then communication and leadership, and then the second part is what I do. And so that's the impact cycle, and then gathering data, and then teaching strategies, and in particular creating an instructional playbook. And then that all, it's education. So it has to be a Venn diagram. So that all takes place inside a third circle, which is where I work, so that there's widespread understanding of what coaching is and isn't, at least in our organization, policies around confidentiality. And then that the coach actually has time to do their work, and their principal and the coach are aligned theoretically. So the definitive guide is trying to lay out sort of almost like a rubric. These are 7 things. If you don't have a deep understanding of instructional practices, it's going to be difficult when the teacher says, I don't know what to do. And you go, I got nothing either. You really need to be able to give them tools. And then if you can't gather data, how do you set goals and move forward? Now, the whole thing is going to be driven by the teacher, but there are going to be situations where it's really helpful to have expertise. And then the same thing is, there are a lot of people who have expertise, but they come from a place of one up and one down. And so people don't embrace their ideas. So that the definitive guide is kind of like that rubric. And then I'm working on books for each of the different elements of the success factors. So there's a book already on the impact cycle. There's a book on better conversations. There's a book on instructional playbooks. There's high impact instruction. And now I'm working on one called Data Rules, which is on data. So the idea is this book would give you kind of like, this is the introduction, but then if you really want to go deep, you can go deep. And you don't have to go deep with our stuff. You could be looking, for example, at Christian Van Nuremberg's really great book, Essential Coaching Skills, provides really valuable information on that. And your work on instruction. I think all three of those books, or the new US version, which is the hot item I've been looking at, I think those instructional practices are really powerful. So it doesn't, but I think people need a way of understanding this. And, to throw a coach out there with no professional development on how to do their job and say, like, have at it is risky, if not irresponsible,
So it's interesting that one of the things I think is interesting. So in the audience for Mind the Gap is, we have people listening in Australia, and I was there recently, and people were talking about you, and you spoke to Ollie Lovell, and who's a great podcaster and educator out there. So your work is international, and we know we have listeners in the US and so on. So one of the things I think is interesting for the UK perspective is how instructional coaching as a concept has been sort of studied and explored, but it's kind of exploded in the last 5 years. But it still hasn't reached the point that you have in the US, where I met people when I was in the US last term who that's their whole job. They are instructional coach, and every day they're in a school coaching teachers, and that's their work. And almost nobody in England has that role. They're normally doing it sort of as part of their job. And so the kind of professional world, the community of people doing instructional coaching in the US it's got this whole sort of professional thing, hasn't it? So that's interesting. Where does that originate? How long has that been the case in the US?
Well, when I first started to think about instructional coaching and describe it, a lot of people told me no one will ever do it. It's just not going to happen. And I remember sitting down with researchers, my colleagues at the University of Kansas, and they said, Jim, you're wasting your time because nobody will ever find the resources for a full-time professional developer. But now it's probably, one of the most popular forms of professional development. And that's because people recognize, knowledge that's not actionable isn't particularly helpful. And so to have someone who helps you implement the practice and do it, there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of examples of people attending workshops and then not being changed by the experience. And so if we really want the schools our kids deserve, we need to provide professional development that actually leads to meaningful, significant change. And to me, that's to have someone whose job is, they're like in Buddhism, they have that idea of the bodhisattva, who's somewhere between the world and paradise. Now, not that effective instruction is paradise, but you need someone who really understands what it is to be a teacher, but also their job is to help you figure out how to put that research into the school in a way that's highly respectful of the professionalism of teachers. And I just think there's ample evidence of poorly designed professional development that doesn't lead to much change. So that's where I think it goes. I think, I don't know. I think it's just maybe we were on a little earlier in North America, and it's grown there quicker. It's growing more in Australia, though. I think in Australia, New Zealand, there's greater. Still, it's not necessarily a full-time position that much. And in many international schools now, that people are becoming full-time instructional coaches. It's kind of growing there. So we'll see where it goes. But I mean, you want to be as efficient as you can, but if it's not working, it's not very efficient. And instructional coaching should be leading to, significant, unmistakably positive changes that improve the learning and the well-being of kids' lives,
Yeah, it's great. Well, I must admit, it's one of the things I'm looking forward to more than anything in my professional world is coming to Orlando in October with Oliver to the Teach and Learning Coaching Conference. We just can't believe we're going. It's in SeaWorld. I mean, it's just unreal. It's going to be And the whole place is full of people who are totally focused on instructional coaching for 3 whole days. It's just what a great thing.
Wow.
So Emma, what's your your road into this whole world of instructional coaching, and Jim?
I'm kind of going to go from those big conversations you've both just had about kind of global trends and national trends and whatever. I'm going to take it right down to kind of the local level, because in the trust of 15 schools that I currently work in, over the last sort of 18 months, what they decided was to invest in instructional coaching and developing instructional coaching as part of what they call teacher development time. So they give everybody in the trust an extra 2 hours off timetable a week to focus on professional development. And we trained up a load of colleagues in instructional coaching, and we started to roll it out. And we thought, this is brilliant. We're really onto something here. But what we found initially was there was a kind of a grey area between the established idea of coaching and then what instructional coaching was. And so people were mistakenly coming to this, wanted to talk about their general life goals or their partner and how they annoyed them, or there was something that wasn't necessarily focused on actually instructional coaching. So the question I really wanted to ask Jim is when you're going to implement this, when you're going from I'm really excited about this to I want to make this work, how do you communicate to large organizations the very specific approach of instructional coaching and how it's different from, or may have crossover with, what people may perceive as general coaching?
So I have written about this in the impact cycle, and I'll come at try to answer this question in 2 ways. But I distinguish between what I call facilitative coaching and dialogical coaching and directive coaching. And so with facilitative coaching, it's about what you're calling general coaching. And when I'm a facilitative coach, and I don't mean to trivialize it because I really believe in facilitative coaching. I've had many facilitative coaches, but in facilitative coaching, the coach is really helping me think deeply and make plans and focus on important things, set goals. And the main job of the coach is to listen really carefully, ask good questions, and ask questions that invite me to think deeper and come away with action, clarity, and energy at the end of it. I know what I'm going to do, and I feel good about it. But that's great when there isn't expertise involved. So if someone was going to help me train for a marathon and they were my coach, maybe that's not the best example, but if someone was going to help me clean my closet, for example, or organize my desk here, which is pretty messy, they wouldn't have to have special expertise. I wouldn't need it. I know what I have to do. I have the knowledge I need. But then when you move into other fields, there's a body of literature. Literally billions of dollars has been spent on identifying what effective teaching practices are. And what distinguishes instructional coaching is we share those practices, but we do it from the same set of beliefs that guide facilitative coaching. So dialogical coaching is grounded in helping the teacher hit a goal they want to hit. We think professional development tends to be done backwards. An expert shows up, tells you this is the way you need to teach. And then as a teacher, you have to try to figure out, well, how do I make that fit my class? And then your first implementation is kind of crappy. And the easiest thing to do is to go back to the way it was before. It wasn't that bad before, so why should I do this new thing? But we think it works from the inside out, not from the outside in, which is once you've got a compelling goal the teacher really wants to hit, then you pull out the teaching walkthroughs and you say, I wonder which of these strategies could help us hit that goal. And so it's driven by the goal of the teacher. So an instructional coach works from the same set of beliefs. In fact, large parts of instructional coaching is the same as, say, facilitative coaching, except the fourth part of it, like the beliefs are probably the same, the communication skills are the same. There's probably a different communication process. We use the impact cycle or a framework for conversation, but there's still going to be some kind of framework. Maybe it's Sir John Whitmore's GROW would be the facilitative approach. But when the teacher says to me, my kids are just not engaged at all, and I don't know what to do, the first question I'd ask is, well, what are you even thinking you might do? But if they're like, I've got nothing, then I would say, well, is it all right with you if I share some ideas? You tell me, I've got this book with ideas. You tell me if any of these sound like things that might be helpful. And the teacher still makes the choice all through the process. The teacher makes the choice. I'm not forcing it, but it's helpful to have somebody who has that expertise and then also understands the process and understands how to set goals and how to make adaptations, the whole process. So that's where instructional coaching is different than, and I think once you get into the process of the impact cycle, it's pretty clear what we're doing here, because we sit down and we say, well, the first thing is we need to get a clear picture of reality of what's happening in your classroom. So I could interview the students. We could have a group conversation. I could video record the class. You could look at it. We could look at student work, some comp or something else, but let's get clear on what's happening. And then we'll set a goal about what you want to see change in the classroom. So I think once you get into the impact cycle, that's how it goes. Mm-hmm. The directive approach has a place, but I think it's way, way overdone. The directive approach is where I'm going to tell you something you need to do, and you need to do it. And I think it's appropriate. For example, if someone's being a toxic force on a team, someone's using microaggressions in the classroom, someone's bullying kids, someone's unprofessional, then you take the directive approach, especially in an administrative role. Sometimes you have to be directive, but the research is pretty clear. People aren't that motivated by other people telling them what to do. And adults are really skilled in nodding their head yes and doing nothing. And we just found, and it also deprofessionalizes teaching to think that there's one right way and the coach knows what it is and knows what the teacher doesn't know. I think it makes more sense to start with the goal that the teacher wants to set and figure out how can we use this set of teaching practices to hit that goal. That's how I'd put it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And this is to me, this is one of the stuff. I mean, over the time, it's great to discuss this and debate these things. I think this is quite a hot debate, I think, in the world of coaching in the UK. Because you've got various approaches and platforms and systems which people are trying to use, and some people are more orientated towards saying a bit more positive about sort of slightly more directive coaching and so on, and it comes out of it from a place like this. So this is my experience, and I'm really interested in what you think about this. So when I go to a school, which has got 80 teachers and not so many full-on coaches, but you've got
Sure.
people. The head of department for maths or science is responsible for those teachers, and someone might be helping them. We look at the lessons, and sometimes there's really obvious things that you think those would be good strategies to work on as a team, like collectively, because we can see across all the lessons that they have things in common, for example, and from our experience, we know that if those teachers were to just do this instead of that, or be slightly more sharp with this thing, those lessons would be better. So you do have quite a lot of advice to give. But of course, the teachers themselves need to come to that. So for me, there's a bit of a tension with sort of the long game of, so what do you think you need to solve? And sometimes teachers are really good at that, like they really get it. And but sometimes they don't, and the directive thing feels like a fairly natural thing to do. To say, that suggesting thing, it comes a bit earlier. So, I mean, do you know what I mean? It's sort of,
yeah.
You say it's quite a long way down the track, but is it always? Do you think?
Yes. Categorically, okay. Yes.
Right.
I've spent 25 years studying instructional coaching. I work with Atul Gawande at Harvard. We did a project with surgeons at Harvard. I've written 7 or 8 books about coaching. We spent more than $30 million on research on instructional coaching. And yet when I go to talk to educators, they say, well, I don't really think it's that way. And that's the way it is. We have to experience it ourselves to make it real. And I understand that. I think if I show up and say it has to be done this way, I'm just going to encounter resistance because people are going to do what they're going to do. So, I don't think workshops are a bad idea. I give lots of workshops, but they're probably not going to lead to significant change. People start to forget the workshop seconds after it's over. Within 3 or 4 days, they've probably forgotten 90% of what they learned in the workshop. But the workshop's important for awareness. If they pick, the beauty of your book and the books on the walkthroughs is I can pick that book up and I can quickly remind myself of how to do it. I can teach myself how to do it. It's even better if you have a coach who helps you do that. But it's not going to be likely the workshop they remember. It's going to be they have to reteach themselves after so what a workshop does is give awareness, gives things out. Now, I do think there's a place for directive, but I think it's when the person's unprofessional. And there are things that a district's going to adopt like a district-wide reading program where there's an expectation that everybody's going to do it. So you can take some elements of coaching, but I think that's more like implementation support than instructional coaching. But to me, if you really want change, it's not going to happen by treating teachers like empty vessels to be filled. It's going to be happen through professional discourse between two equals. And I just think the assumption that I know what that person needs to do, one of the cool things about instructional coaching is you model the practices sometimes in the teacher's classroom. And when you stand in front of the class and you start modeling, you go, ooh, this isn't quite as easy as it looked like when I was just sitting on the outside watching what the person had to do. It's a whole different story. The other thing is, it takes a while to get proficient at something, whatever it might be. And so when that person has a compelling goal they want to pursue, and they really want to hit the goal, they really want to see a change in engagement or achievement, then they'll stick with it and they'll get high quality implementation because the goal matters to them. But if they're just doing it because their administrator needed them to do it, they'll do the bare minimum. They don't want to get fired. They'll do what they have to do, but they don't really embrace it. And to get to proficient, you have to stick with it. And if you can have somebody who helps you modify it and adapt it and make it, it's adaptive learning, make it work in your environment, I think the quality is going to be greater. Now, having said all that, as forcefully as I've been, I think every situation is different. And so there may well be such, and also cultures are different. So for example, in the little study I did, and I was really superficial to it, but that Atul Gawande did in India, the culture of coaches in India, where they were working with midwives, was a lot different than the culture in, New York City. And so I think you have to recognize there's things that work locally and so forth. But if I'm telling you what to do and you have to come to me for ideas, I create dependence. And then the person is like, well, I'll give you an example and then but I had this friend of mine invite me out for breakfast a couple weeks ago, about a month ago now. And he's a professor. And he said, my kids, my students just aren't that engaged. He says, I know you study this coaching thing. I'd like to talk about how to increase engagement. And then I said to him a coaching question. I said, well, have you ever done something where the kids were really engaged? And he talked about this thing he did where kids were all involved and the kids were really engaged. And then I thought, well, I've written high impact instruction. I've got a workshop on how to increase engagement. I'm writing a book now about gathering data on engagement. I've read a lot about engagement. So then I told him 7 or 8 really great things he could do about coaching, just golden advice. And then I just watched him and I felt good telling him, I felt he's going to think I'm really smart because look at all my good ideas I've got to tell him. And he just got smaller in his chair. And at the end of it, I didn't even notice. I was so into telling him all these great ideas. But at the end of it, I think he won't do anything I suggested. And if I had explored the thing that had worked for him and then figured out how some of my ideas had fit with that, he might have changed. But in that conversation, I just made him feel small. I mean, I diminished him rather than empowered him. So I think that's the check. Now, one more thing. I know I said this is my one more thing, but here's one more thing. I have a project right now with people around the world. Mark Verde in Bangkok is one of the people, and they send me videos every day about their experiences coaching. And every one of them, the struggle is real. They go in the classroom, they see something happening, and they want to tell here's what, let me fix it for you. But the trouble is when you fix it for them, you create dependence. You don't empower the person. And I think there are times when you say, this is what I'm going to do. If it works, great. I mean, I wouldn't want to limit what's possible. But in general, and I think DC and Ryan's research would support this, in general, people don't want to be told. People want to process it for themselves. They want to be treated like professionals, not like unskilled laborers. And when we tell them what to do, we don't treat them like professionals.
Do you think, Jim, that this is something to do with teachers, as in when you're a teacher and you're teaching your student, there is a certain urgency about getting through content and getting things done and getting everybody to understand it, and you are the giver of the knowledge all the time because you're the expert in the room. And do you think there's then a kind of quite a difficult potential transition from being that in that kind of high energy expert context to then being in this more not less expert, but less in charge of leading that environment when you move into a coaching role?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. The question I'd have, though, Emma, is I wonder if us being the experts as teachers, and Tom, you'll know better than I do what the answer, both of you will know better than I do what the answer is, but I wonder if it wouldn't work better if we had more situations where kids are driven to learn something, and then they try to, we had inside out learning for kids rather than outside in. So I wonder if we'd be better teachers if we took and I don't have the expertise to answer that question, but I think it's an important question to consider, because I think what I don't like is I don't like people going through the motions. I don't like them just doing something because it has to be done. I want it to be authentic and meaningful. And that starts with something they want to focus on, but I think, yeah, as a teacher, my job is to be clear, to help them get it. And I think working in a coaching perspective, when you lead a workshop, I think it's effective teaching. And I do believe in workshops. I think that they create awareness. But then if you have a coach who follows up afterwards, I say the coach is the memory for the teachers. The coach can come back and help you implement that thing. And in that case, coaching is a different thing than teaching.
And that's what I mean. It's quite a different role and a potentially difficult transition to go from a really highly effective classroom teacher to a very different way of working as a really effective instructional coach. It's a different kind of setup, isn't it? Right.
And it's challenging, and it may not. It's a good question whether or not everybody is capable of it. I don't know the answer to that question.
It's interesting. I mean, and it links to various other analogies that, about teaching about. I mean, Dylan Williams talked about it being like the knowledge you need to teach is like the knowledge you need to ride a bike. You have to get on the bike to feel that, and someone can guide you. And then last weekend, I took my daughter for her first ever practice. She just had her first ever driving lesson. She's 24, and I went in the car with her for a practice, and it was way too early because she was still at that kind of feeling the clutch and the gas pedal thing, and we were doing the boom, boom, boom down the road. And I was trying to say, soft, it's just a little bit softer. And she was sort of saying, well, what do you mean? I said, like, I can't tell you what it feels like. I can only tell you how to describe it. So you have to find it. You have to find it. And it's so interesting having to sort of, this is the thing I sort of come to, I mean, I wrestle this all the time, is that I have a framework for driving, which I can describe quite precisely. And because I see so many hundreds of teachers, I have a framework for teaching, which I think is quite, well grounded in evidence of seeing effective teachers teach. So when I'm talking to an individual teacher who might be somebody who, is finding some of the things quite difficult, I've got to get them to that same understanding, like my daughter with the driving. I've got to get them to come to that sense of what they might do, and they have to be at the center of it. But I have a sense of, I definitely have an agenda. It's not like it's a blank slate. What do you want to solve? I feel like I'm coming to it with some content, some structure, because of so I mean. Is that where the sort of playbook idea comes in, or because I feel like we can sometimes lose energy by constantly reinventing everything every time we teach a new teacher. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the question always comes back to implementation. I mean, I believe that being really clear on what you're going to teach, gathering data on whether or not kids are learning, providing feedback, adjusting your teaching, those things are probably going to be a lot more helpful than not. But just because I tell somebody to do it doesn't mean they're going to do it. And I think your analogy with your daughter is that person has to work it out for themselves. They have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Like, it's not one. This is a phrase I've swiped from Eric Liu, but it's not one size fits all. It's one size fits one. And what works for one group of students with one teacher, it's going to look different somewhere else. And so to me, the learning has to be professional practice. I mean, it has to be learned that way. There's a wonderful book about leadership by Ron Heifetz, and he distinguishes between technical challenges and adaptive challenges. And he says technical challenge is something that has a concrete solution. Like, what's the schedule going to look like for next year's school year? Who's going to teach what? That's a technical challenge. And adaptive challenge is like raising a child. And if one child is complex, what about a classroom full of children? I mean, that's an adaptive challenge. And what Heifetz says is the greatest mistake leaders make is to treat adaptive challenges like technical challenges. Here's a recipe to solve the complexity of the classroom. It has to be adapted, and which isn't to say, as a coach, I don't think you should sit there like a rock and keep things to yourself. Like if I'm looking at a situation, the teacher says, my kids are not listening to me, or I feel I can't keep track of it. I think you can propose things, but the teacher's not going to do it just because you tell them. It makes more sense to they're going to make a choice whether you give them the choice or not. So I just say, is it all right with you if I share a few ideas I've got about this, and you tell me if any of these give you confidence? And so I'm not withholding my expertise. I share my expertise, but I share it in a way that I think recognizes the other person, because professionalism is about making choices. It's about discretion. If I tell them this is what you need to do, it's probably not going to be nearly as effective as when I say, well, here's a couple options. Tell me which one you think. And if somebody says, I'm thinking I'm going to do this thing, and I think it's just a really wrong-headed thing, I'd say, is it all right if I tell you something I'm wondering about this? What about this? This is something I'm wondering. If you do cooperative learning before you get behavior in place, kids might get more off task. That's what I think. Well, what do you think? Because they're going to do what they're going to do, whether you tell them or not. So you might as well just put the choice out there in the conversation, let them make the decision. And it's more respectful that way, and it's more likely to lead to change, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Is there sorry, I'm just thinking about the range of teachers that I work with in terms of career stage. Is there a sweet spot for instructional coaching to work really, really effectively? So I'm just thinking colleagues who are initially training to be a teacher very, very early on in their career. Does instructional coaching, I don't mean does it work, but is it the most effective thing for a very early career teacher? Is it something that works better when you've kind of got a few basics automated in terms of your practice? Or is it something that everybody at every stage can get something out of? Or is there like a little sweet spot where this is the point where you kind of, it really kicks in?
Well, I think there are people for whom coaching may not be the right thing. They have other issues that need to be dealt with more, that are more important. I mean, maybe they have a parent they're really worried about, or they have a child that's behavior is problematic, or they have issues outside of school, or there's other things that might be going on that aren't coaching things. I think coaching, first off, it's not the solution to every problem. And then I think providing some professional development on different things is helpful. But like in America, there's a thing called CHAMPS, which is a classroom management model where you identify the expectations for all the activities and the transitions, and then you teach the kids, what's the conversation going to look like? How do I ask for help? What's the activity? Can I move around? What's participation look like? What are the success criteria? And lots of teachers have workshops on CHAMPS. And I see those posters they create in their classrooms, and they look at them at the start of the year and they never implement them after that. And if they had set a goal around disruptions or engagement or some goal that really mattered to them, where they felt this is going to make a difference in my class, they'd have to keep implementing those practices until they worked. And so the goal would drive it. And I don't know that everybody needs a coach, but it would be, if I had a mantra, I would say, yes, they do. I mean, I think, and I'm not saying that's the only form. I think, for example, curriculum development, there's a book I wrote called Unmistakable Impact, where I have a thing called intensive learning team. I think that happens better in teams. If you're good at statistics and I'm good at geometry, and we can get together and plan this together, and a group of people come together and share their ideas, I think curriculum development makes more sense in team. But when you take the things that have been developed and you put them in the classroom, then the coach becomes really important. So in terms of...
That was something I was asking you, because this is the debate I've been having recently, is about specialism. And there are some people who've been on some they were labeled instructional coaching processes, which they felt were unsatisfactory because they didn't have a subject specific component, and they felt they were being asked to implement, or the reference frame was generic teaching techniques rather than how to teach history better or maths better. Right. What's your sense of that component being a key skill or part of what the coach is bringing?
Well, that's a really good question. I do think an instructional coach is not they're not a content coach. So their job is different. Their job is about pedagogy. But we talk about creating playbooks, and the strategies in the playbooks. You could use the walkthroughs as your point of departure for creating a playbook. The strategies in the playbook, they're proven by teachers setting goals and hitting the goals using those practices. And then over time, the playbook gets refined. It's a receptacle for organizational learning about what teaching works. And what works in one school might not work in another school. And so I think I think it's a good critique that different content areas might involve different pedagogical practices, but I think over time, the school should be getting more and more clear. These are the things that really work in this school, like our school in Bangkok, who's using your materials, and they've got their 7 core strategies they're focusing on. I think over time you develop a playbook of what works. The question is, does it help me accomplish student-focused goals, either achievement or engagement goals? And if it does, it's working. And if it doesn't, then we need to change it. And that's the impact cycle. Once we get in there, we try things out, we make modifications until we hit our goal. So that's kind of how I see it. It's proven. I call it local validity. It's proven in the classroom. It's proven in the school.
Yeah, and that's a good. I'll come back to that. But go on, Emma.
No, I was going to move it on to a chapter in the definitive guide about listening, but I can leave that for a moment if you wanted to pick up on what Jim had just said. Though.
No, I just think it is my experience. I mean, I feel like I quite like the fact that, having done this for so long, that I could go to any subject. In fact, one of my greatest joys is going into a hair and beauty class in a further education college, and with now some confidence that when I'm watching them do the hair demonstrations and the client interaction stuff, I even know some of the language they use, that I can talk to them about hairdressing, and even though I can't do it myself, because I've seen them do it, and I kind of know some of the pitfalls with the process and the kind of client-facing aspect of it, as well as the technical aspect of it. And so I'm more confident in the generic coaching because I've sort of got some familiarity with the territory. And that's true of nearly every other area. So I do feel like if I'd only ever done one session with a hairdressing teacher, I think I wouldn't feel so good. But because I've done several, I feel like there's a bit of my knowledge about the material which supports my wider coaching confidence. That's my experience, but it didn't start that way.
What's interesting is, sorry for interrupting, but what's interesting is that our coaches in Beaverton, where we were doing the research on Beaverton, Oregon, where we were doing the research on the impact cycle, they felt they were better coaches outside their content area.
Really?
Now, this was a group of 6 coaches, so it's not generalizable data, and I know if I go to a school, I once went to a school and they said, well, the first thing you're going to do is home economics. They're going to cook something, and you're going to do a model lesson there. And the next one's going to be three-dimensional drawing. Like, I have no clue, but any of the things they put, I think they're out to get me. But at any rate, but the coaches said if they teach in their content area, they're like, oh, when I taught it, this is what I did. But when they're outside their content area, they have to listen better. They have to be better coaches. Now, personally, I would rather, my area is English. I studied English literature. I would rather work with an English teacher because I feel we have a shared vocabulary and there's a lot of things we could talk about. And I feel more confident there. But it was interesting that they felt they coached better outside their area. The bottom line, though, is helping the teacher set a goal and then hitting the goal. And whatever we do, if it's not hitting the goal, we have to change it. It could be what the teacher needs is beyond my expertise. And I'll say, look, I'll get back to you next week. I'm going to do some research. I'll bring back some options. It's not like I have an answer to every challenge, but what I can do is I can work with the teacher to help them hit the challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, Emma.
I love the way you've gone from physics to foils, Tom.
Trust me.
That's quite the spectrum. What I was going to ask Jim is quite a neat segue, actually. It was about the listening chapter in there, and about how important listening is as a coach. So I was thinking, how much of that can you turn into a process somebody could learn to be a great coach? And is there an element of that listening that's kind of a personal, emotional intelligence element that maybe can't be taught? So is there can the whole listening thing be something that everybody can capture and implement? Or is there an element of kind of, you're just not a great listener, you're not going to be a great coach?
I don't know. I think that's really a good question. I think we do people a disservice if we assume they're never going to learn it. You know, I want to have faith that they can learn it, the skills. It would depend on their motivation too. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things played into it. Like a lot of people struggle not being the expert and being a partner in the learning. I mean, that's something you have to overcome. And interruption is a habit of communication. That's going to affect your communication. I'll just say this. What we found, we worked with this group in Beaverton when I wrote the impact cycle, and then we've done other groups since then, but I work with them pretty intensively. We met about 30 days each year for 3 years. And at the end of it, we had this kind of wonderful kind of closing act time together. And I said, you know, we've been together, we've had all these meetings. What's been most useful? What's been most helpful to you as a coach? And they said, Jim, no offense, but it's not you. It's watching ourselves on video. They said, when we watch ourselves on video, then our practices changed. Then we realized we had to get better at what we did. And so I would say, I don't know for sure if everybody can become a better listener, but I think if they watch their practice on video, if they see it, they're way more likely to improve their skills. Mm-hmm. And I want to go into the conversation with the assumption that, just like teaching, I want to assume every kid can learn the content.
I guess it's because the camera never lies, but you can lie to yourself about what you normally do, but you can't lie to the camera if it's actually saying that there.
Well, that's why I think video is so integral for coaching, because there's a whole bunch of reasons. The wonderful book about change is Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick, and Adam Grant writes about that in his book Think Again. He has a chapter on motivational interviewing, but they point out that there are all kinds of ways in which we deceive ourselves about reality, and it's not a negative thing. It's to protect ourselves, but we have defense mechanisms that minimize the problem or blame others and externalize blame. And then you add to that our perceptual errors like confirmation bias and habituation and all those things. You know, people just don't know what it looks like when they do what they do. And so there's a reason why athletes are always watching themselves on video, because they can improve their performance. And whether it's coaches or teachers, I mean, I wouldn't force video on people. It's emotionally complex, but I do think it's probably the single most powerful thing you can do to improve your performance is to watch yourself doing it.
Oh my God, I did that in my first ever teaching practice in 1986 in Manchester. And I put the video was about this size on a tripod at the back of the car.
It's over his head.
When I played it back, the first thing I noticed was that there was a lad at the back of the class mumbling under his breath, swearing. I won't say the words he was. And I heard that back on the sound. And he knew that would be picked up. But I was shocked. I was just wanted to shout at myself, stop running around. I was like jumping jack. It's like a nightmare. I just stop still and, let the material come out of your mouth without it being a show. It's like, whoa. Right. So you're right. I mean, that was more feedback than I needed at that time than any of my visiting tutors gave me. One of the things I wanted to pick up on here, because it's one of the things that, in the impact cycle, that identify, learn, improve. This whole thing about the reality check. And this to me is such an interesting thing. It's one of the most powerful ideas that I think I've picked up from you, is that you need to have a reality check. There's a phrase I find I'm using all the time, that it's so hard to self-report and self-diagnose without some external thing. So video is one. Now, the coach, do you feel like as a coach, because you've done some stuff like for training purposes to go and see a lesson, but do you feel like you need to have seen a teacher sort of, several times to build a real good picture of what they're like? Or do you feel like you can be quite effective just with the questions in a one-off session?
I would say the more time, the better, but often the only time is one time. We did a thing where we were looking at when we were first studying coaching in Topeka, Kansas, and back a long time ago, early 2000s, I guess. And we felt it was best to watch 3 classes, because if you see 3, then you can tell if one of them's anachronistic. So 2 times the kids were really engaged, 1 time they weren't engaged. Well, probably it's more like those 2 times, but it's just often not possible to do that. You should be in there. What I would say is, I don't think it's effective to have the teacher watch video and not share it with you, and then have a coaching conversation without knowing what happened in the classroom. I had a few teachers want to do that, and I just found it was kind of like, it was really hard to know if the goal was a good goal or how helpful it was. So I think ideally, if you yourself can video record the class, maybe on some device, share the video with the teacher. If the teacher doesn't mind, you can watch the video, they can watch the video, and then you talk. But that's the ideal scenario. But then if the teacher's like, I don't want anybody getting this video, and you can say, well, let me film it on your device. You can watch it. You'll at least have been there. But the beauty of video is you can pause, you can go back, you can look it over, and you can look at it multiple times, and it gives you more information. I think the more data, the better. But there are those who say like 5 minutes of video is powerful enough. To me, I think you need the whole class at least as a way to go.
That's interesting. Have you ever done that, Emma?
What, videoed myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, first 3 minutes of watching it, I was like, oh my God, it's my mother.
Yeah, I know it's hard. You have to get through the physical thing. Like one of our coaches said, I'm never wearing those purple pants again. That was her first reaction, and I think, nobody ever looks at their video and goes, I'm skinnier and younger than I thought. It's always a shock. Although of course with Zoom and all that, we're getting to a point where it's much more common to see ourselves, but still there is this sense of, but after you've watched once or twice, then you get to whether there's that person who is me, and it's different, but it is
really useful. And especially if you can video yourself from different vantage points in the room at the same time. So you can really see the expression on the children's faces as you're talking, because we set it up where we've got one camera trained on the teacher and one camera trained on the children, to actually see. So you could, in the children's one, you could hear what the teacher was saying, but you could actually see the responses of the children, which was really, really interesting, because you think when you're teaching, you're seeing exactly what their responses are. You're not. And when you watch it back, you're like, oh, that fell a bit flat, or that really worked, or that was really useful. So yeah, I have done it, and it is really interesting, but it's a big hurdle to get over. It's kind of like you just have to get past it and get on with it. And the other thing is, one of the best ways to roll it out in the school is to do it yourself first. So kind of put yourself up there as the video sacrificial lamb and put yourself out there first.
Do you think it matters, Jim? And if you research the sort of the coaching dynamics, because I just realised I could talk to you forever on this, but I feel like I've formed a habit, and I don't know if it's a good one, but it's just I just feel I feel it's productive, so I keep doing it, which is I sort of go into the back of the class and I sit next to someone who has a space next to them, and often is not there a student who's sort of hanging on the edge of the lesson, just about hanging in there, and I'm not really looking at the teacher so much as being with the student to see what they're thinking and doing whilst the lesson's happening. And to me, that kind of reality check is, if I watch the teacher over there, they might be doing all kinds of good stuff, but what for this student's experience is my kind of weather vane of, are they making progress? And often the teacher's so far away from them, they don't pick up on that particular student. And I found that to be a really productive form of reality check. Like, did you notice that such and such? So, I mean, what do you typically do when you go in? Do you sit at the back? Do you walk around?
Well, first off, you probably know, given your experience as a head teacher, you know more about this than I do. So I would defer to your expertise on that. But when I go in, I'm not really trying to come to a conclusion about the class. I'm just trying to take it all in. And so, there's I think it's in the impact cycle, we have a list of things you can talk about with the teacher. Where would you like me to sit? Is it okay if I talk to students? We work those things out. But usually I end up just sitting down, video recording the teacher when she talks or he talks, and then video recording the students when they talk. And even that I would discuss with the teacher, because I'm not going in there to get my opinion. I'm going in there to get as much information as I can. So when I sit down with the teacher, they can set a goal. And I love John Campbell's quote, which he tells me he got from Tony Grant, but his quote is, a less than perfect goal chosen by the teacher is better than the perfect goal chosen by the coach. And so what I'm trying to set up is an emotionally compelling goal that the teacher really wants to go after. Now, if they're doing something that I think is, misguided or unproductive, I'm not going to tell them that's wrong, but I'm also not going to be silent. I'm going to share in a way that honors their capacity to treat them like a professional, which is to say, here's what I'm wondering. You tell me what you think. And the two of us back and forth share the ideas and explore it together. So I think talking to kids about what's happening was, my colleague, Don Deschler at the University of Kansas, they had a project. Our work has primarily been with students with learning disabilities at KU, but they had a study where they just followed students all day. And they just went to every class. They just sort of followed the student all day. And that was super powerful just to see what's happening. But kids in particular with learning disabilities or behavior disability, only one student talked to him all day. And that was because they bumped into him.
Wow,
and they said, oh, sorry. And that was it, whole day, no interactions with anybody the whole day. So I think that's real powerful. And I think it would be the same thing in the classroom. You could probably see a lot just by looking at one student.
Yeah, I mean, I often do that. And I feel like, anyway, it's so interesting. And we're getting the nod from our producer, so we have to wrap this. So I honestly, and we say this, to people because these conversations are so rich, but I just want to have like part 2 instantly.
Well, we're going to do it. We're going to do it in a couple of weeks. So you're going to be on our podcast. So we will have part 2.
I'm so excited about that. And Oliver will be with me then. But right. I actually decided to do this before. I don't often prepare stuff, but I want to read out a bit from your book because I wrote this in the foreword, and I think this is wonderful. So in your conclusion in your definitive guide, it says, most important, perhaps, coaches partner with teachers so they can have an unmistakably positive impact on children's lives. And when a coach helps a teacher make one positive change, that change can have an impact on every student that teacher ever teaches. And I just wanted to go, yeah, like that's the kind of punch the air kind of statement. But it's so powerful. Like if you make a positive change for a teacher as a coach, every kid they ever teach is going to be impacted by that. And that's that's a wonderful thought. And one of the things I love about your work, Jim, and I'm going to wrap up with this, is that you motivate coaches to be better coaches as well as teachers to be better teachers. And I feel that's a really important thing because it's not easy to do. And you have a kind of humility that you model so beautifully every time you talk about coaching. And I feel like I'm sort of I'm just thinking so hard about everything I do because of the way you model it, you have that kind of depth of kind of belief about what the principles. And I think that's so important. I get a bit sidetracked by pragmatism and getting things done. And you're like, there are principles and they matter, and you keep that kind of line. And I think that's really important that you have that kind of strength of voice in the whole sort of community. So look, thank you so much, Jim. Really great talking to you. Thank you to everyone listening to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe. We've had an absolute storm of great guests this term since Christmas. And wow, talking to Jim has been a real honor. So thank you so much. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for everyone listening.